What's going on, guys? My name is Tyson, and I'm just super excited to be able to share with you guys today. And just the fact that it's almost Christmas and it's the holiday season, and man, I absolutely love Christmas. If you can't tell by the Santa hat on my deer, I'm a Christmas person. I love Christmas, I love hot chocolate, I love cookies, I love the movies, I love the weather, the clothes, the food, the family. And man, I just love the intentional time that we have to celebrate the birth of Jesus. And so when I was tasked with coming up with a tradition that my family has to share with you in this video, when I sat down, we don't really have a lot of traditions. We're not a tradition type family, but one thing we do every year that kind of stood out to me was we attend my grandma's Christmas party. And so my grandma throws this Christmas party. She goes all out, groceries, a bunch of food. She gets a bunch of gifts. She invites a bunch of people. She decorates for it. She does all this stuff in preparation months in advance. And man, we just look forward to it every time Christmas rolls around every year. And me and my cousins, one of the reasons we look forward to this party is because of the gifts. And I know that sounds bad, but I need you guys to stick with me. Just hear me out for a second. My grandma is the sweetest lady ever. I love her to death, but she is not great at determining what a teenager would want for Christmas. And with that being said, me and my cousins every year, when we open up our gifts at her party from her, it is something that is just super unpredictable and random, and let's just say that a teenager would not pick it out for themselves. And don't get me wrong, I'm grateful, I'm appreciative for it. It's actually something that we look forward to just because it is so random. But to kind of give you guys an example, 3 years ago I got a Jesus coloring book. 2 years ago I got a laundry hamper, and then last year I got a puzzle that was of a football. And so that's something that me and my cousins, maybe it's not for the reasons you would think, but it's something that we're able to look forward to, and it makes that party even more special. And so parties in general are a huge part of the Christmas season, and it's actually a huge tradition for a bunch of families. And so whether it's you're going to a party with friends or with family, or you're going to a party at your work, it's a huge part of the Christmas season in general. And actually, in scripture, it actually does mention types of parties and feasts and celebrations. And the verses that I want to focus on is in the book of Matthew, chapter 22, verses 1 through 14. This parable is comparing the kingdom of heaven to a wedding feast that a king throws for his son. And I want to read these verses. I encourage you to read along if you have your Bible with you. Again, it's the book of Matthew, chapter 22, verses 1 through 14. And it says this: "And again, Jesus spoke to them in parables, saying, The kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who gave a wedding feast for his son, and sent his servants to call those who were invited to the wedding feast, but they would not come. Again, he sent other servants, saying, Tell those who are invited, see, I have prepared my dinner. My oxen and my fat calves have been slaughtered, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding feast. But they paid no attention and went off, one to his farm, another to his business, while the rest seized his servants, treated them shamefully, and killed them. The king was angry, and he sent his troops and destroyed those murderers and burned their city. Then he said to his servants, The wedding feast is ready, but those invited were not worthy. Go therefore to the main roads and invite to the wedding feast as many as you find. And those servants went out into the roads and gathered all whom they found, both bad and good, so the wedding hall was filled with guests. But when the king came in to look at the guests, he saw there was a man who had no wedding garment. And he said to him, Friend, how do you get in here without a wedding garment? He was speechless. Then the king said to the attendants, Bind him hand and foot and cast him into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many are called, but few are chosen." And man, there's a lot to unpack in this parable. And I really want to focus on, for the sake of this video, I really want to focus on those final verses where it talks about the guy who was not dressed in a wedding garment, who ended up being cast out because of that. And so we see that at this feast, there was a specific dress code, and the dress code was to wear a wedding garment. And it's important to note before we speak on anything further, it's important to note that during this time, it would have been likely that the king would have provided a wedding garment either with the invitation or upon arrival, but he would have provided a wedding garment to this guy. And so he didn't show up wearing it, and therefore he was cast out of the kingdom. And so the thing about parties is that the same thing applies to just parties in general. That there's a specific dress code that is required at each party. If it's a business casual, you're gonna have to dress business casual. If it's casual, you dress casual. If it is formal, then you're gonna have to dress up a little bit nicer. If it's a costume party, you pull a Jourdain and you dress up as John McClane, and you get your wife to dress up as Holly McClane. And if it's an ugly sweater party, then you get to bust out your ugly sweater for the night. And so there's a specific dress code for each party. And actually, it's the same for the kingdom of heaven. There's a specific dress code that is required of the kingdom of heaven. And that is that we are required to dress ourselves in God's righteousness. And so what happens when we don't follow the dress code? And what happens when we choose not to dress ourselves in righteousness? What happens when we follow what the dude in the parable did and we don't dress ourselves in the wedding garment, which is representative of God's righteousness? And actually, this parable, the guy in the parable, is a perfect example. We see what happened to him. We see that he didn't care enough to be influenced by the message within the king's invitation, and therefore he didn't wear the wedding garment. And that made him, that ended up making him not be connected or in relation to the king at all. He showed up, and because he didn't follow the message within the invitation, he wasn't connected, or he wasn't related to the king or the king's son in any way. And so how does this relate to the kingdom of heaven? Well, in the book of Revelations, it says that Jesus knocks on the door to our hearts. And so that right there is an invitation. I mean, he's inviting you to give your life to him and to save your life through the gospel and transform your life through the gospel. And so when he knocks on the door to our hearts, he also provides us with clothes, and he provides us with his righteousness, which we can choose to truly accept that invitation and dress ourselves in his righteousness, or we can deny, or we can claim to have accepted that invitation. And as Christians, we are called to truly accept that invitation that Jesus sends us and to be transformed by the message of the gospel. And so, talking about being transformed by the message within the invitation, the guy in the parable wasn't transformed by the message within the king's invitation. He didn't show up how the invitation said that he should. And so think about a party. So let's say there's this party that you got an invitation to, and it says to show up at 9 p.m. and wear a costume. And so everybody who shows up at 9 p.m. wearing a costume has been influenced and transformed by the message of that invitation. And so there's something else that we can learn from this guy in the parable that I think is super important to know. And that is that this guy, he was invited to the feast, he even attended the feast, but he wasn't welcome at the feast. And the reason that he wasn't welcome is because he wasn't related to, or he couldn't connect to the king in any way. And so with that being said, how do we relate that to the kingdom of heaven? And that is that we can claim to have accepted the invitation, but if we aren't truly transformed by the message of the gospel, then then what we are claiming is false. And this is huge in the South, and this was huge in my life, especially in the South, but just in the world in general. People claim to have been saved. At VBS when they were in the third grade, or at an emotionally driven student camp, but they haven't they haven't been transformed by the gospel, excuse me. And so this was also apparent in my life. Earlier, through middle school, I would have claimed to have accepted that invitation. But when Jesus provided me with clothing, when he presented me with his righteousness to dress myself in, I cast it out and I ignored it, just like the guy in the parable. And I chose to dress myself in things of this world rather than dressing myself in his righteousness. And in return, I wasn't connected and I wasn't in relation with God. And so maybe this is you. And maybe you realize that you haven't really accepted that invitation. And here's the good news, is that Jesus is knocking on the door to your heart right now. And you have the opportunity to answer that invitation and dress yourself in the clothing that he is providing you with his righteousness. And so there's a verse that I want to share with you guys, and it's in the book of Isaiah, chapter 61, verse 10, and it says this: I will greatly rejoice in my Lord. My soul shall exult in my God, for he has clothed me with the garments of salvation. He has covered me with the robe of righteousness, as a bridegroom decks himself like a priest with a beautiful headdress, and as a bride adorns herself with her jewels. And the reason that I'm sharing this with you guys is that this verse kind of applies to both. It's super comforting to people who have accepted that invitation, and man, it's a good reminder during this holiday season that he that you are supposed to your soul should exult in your God, and that you will rejoice in the Lord, and that he has clothed you with the garments of salvation. And it's a great reminder, and it's comforting during this holiday season. But it also applies to the people who feel called to take that next step. And it's a great encouraging thing to take that next step. And so as you guys go about your Christmas and you go about your New Year's, and you begin to receive invitations for different types of parties and celebrations and dinners, remember the invitation that Jesus sends to you, and the fact that you have to be transformed by the message of the gospel and not just claim to have answered the invitation to be welcomed.